This will not stop with these so-called ceremonies. You will have kids educated in school. You're already called a bigot. This judge assumes anybody who differs with her is motivated by hate. She hasn't psychoanalyzed 8 million people in Virginia. This whole thing is a farce.
This whole thing is a farce. That was reaction today from the Republican lawmaker who co-sponsored an amendment banning same-sex marriage in Virginia, an amendment struck down last night by a federal judge. The way things are going right now, he and other opponents of marriage equality may have to hang their hopes on Senator Ted Cruz, who appears to be embarking on a DOMA revivalist crusade. Joining me now is Washington Post columnist Jonathan Capehart. Jonathan.
Hey, Alex.
When does the high priest of self-promotion just take 5 minutes out of his day to just not be self-promoting and weirdly fractious? And I'm, of course, speaking now of Ted Cruz. It's, you know, the Senate hijinks aside, it is actually hard for me to understand how Ted Cruz's desire to sort of reinvigorate the Defense of Marriage Act at the state level is beneficial to him. It's certainly not beneficial to the Republican Party, but how that's beneficial to him in the long run, given where we are and where the tide of history is going.
Well, look, everything with regard to Senator Cruz revolves around two things. You hit on the primary one, which is Senator Ted Cruz. The other thing is fundraising. Keep in mind, the country is moving very, very quickly away from the position that Senator Cruz and that other person from Virginia was talking about. Most Americans are, you know, for equality, for fairness. So why would Ted Cruz do this? Well, Ted Cruz is a darling of the Tea Party base of the Republican Party. When he shut down the government against the wishes of right-thinking people and certainly the Republican leadership, he couldn't care less because he was raising money hand over fist by, you know, taking it to the man in Washington. Well, the same thing is going on here, I think, when it comes to Ted Cruz sort of banging around here on trying to revive DOMA, which the Supreme Court was pretty clear is unconstitutional.
You know, Jonathan, it seems to me that at some point, putting your name on pieces of paper, pieces of legislation like this will come back to haunt you. Not you, but Ted Cruz, I'm talking to you. And nowhere is that, I think, shame going to be more pronounced than in the state of Kansas, which is trying to pass a law. The state Senate is not going to take it up, but the state House passed this law that would bar punishment when individuals, groups, and businesses cite religious beliefs in refusing to recognize a marriage or civil union and or provide goods, services, accommodations, or employments to a couple. If you substituted sexual orientation for skin color, these are Jim Crow laws.
Yeah, I was thinking, you know, pink water fountains all of a sudden are going to pop up in Kansas. How this survives court scrutiny is beyond me, or survives even a court challenge. As I think a piece in Slate pointed out, that this is much broader than just refusing service to same-sex couples. It could, you know, boil down to refusing service to just an individual gay person. And I don't see how in Kansas that is going to be allowed to stand. And thankfully, if I remember correctly, the Senate president made it clear that, you know, this isn't going to come up, or isn't going to come up for a vote, or at least the Senate president didn't feel comfortable with this statute because of its discriminatory impact.
Yeah, I mean, it is capital D discrimination. That said, we focused on the negative, and something really big happened in Virginia last night, and you've written about it in the Post. And, you know, one of the points that you make that I think is really relevant here is this is happening in the Old Dominion, and that you are seeing a wave of legislatures, governance, judges take up the issue of gay marriage in southern states, which is truly reflective of how broad the agreement is on marriage equality.
Well, here's the thing, Alex. What we're seeing happening in Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, let me look down at my cheat sheet, Alabama, Virginia, Utah, Nevada, you have court action happening in places where if the people went to the polls to vote on the civil rights of gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people, those measures would pass in terms of putting in discrimination. So that's why the courts are very important. And what the Supreme Court did with its June ruling invalidating the so-called Defense of Marriage Act and allowing same-sex marriage to go forward in California is send it back to the states and let them decide. And the way Justice Kennedy wrote the decision, and Justice Scalia in the dissent saying, by what you're doing with DOMA, you're making it possible for states to then invalidate their state constitutions. Well, that's what's happening. That's what's happening. It's impossible when a legally married same-sex couple or a committed same-sex couple goes and says, look, we were married in California or in New York or here in the District of Columbia, and then we moved back home to Texas or Louisiana or Alabama, and suddenly we're no longer married. Well, we should enjoy the same rights and responsibilities as heterosexually married couples. We're not asking for a special right. We're asking for civil rights because we are legally married if we just cross the border to go someplace else. And so because those couples are asking for fairness and the argument that they're asking for special rights is thrown out the window, well, any right-thinking judge will look at their argument and pull in the Supreme Court opinion from June 2013, and say, well, you know what? These folks have a point. And you might be pointing to this in a second, but there's a Slate piece out that talks about how all the challenges since the DOMA demise and since the Supreme Court decision, all those challenges have won.
Yeah, and in fact, Slate's written, Dahlia Lithwick and David Cohen point out, I think, incredibly, this is a really important piece of this, which is that since the U.S. versus Windsor decision, 32 different judges have considered whether the case is merely about the relationship between the state and federal governments or whether it's about equality, and all 32 of them have found for equality. Not a single one has disagreed. I mean, that is the point here, is we are no longer framing this as a question of powers and federal versus state powers, but a fundamental one about equality. And there, it's almost, the logic is it's almost, you can't disagree with it.
Yeah, this is no longer, the terrain is no longer ideological, it's legal, it's on the law. And when it's on the law, LGBT people and couples win.
The Washington Post's Jonathan Capehart, happy Valentine's Day to you, my friend.
Thanks, same to you, Alex.
Coming up, the White House has just issued new guidelines on the hazy intersection between banks and businesses that sell illegal marijuana. I will talk to you all about pot, profit, and oversight coming up next.